You are listening to Lighthearted, the official podcast of the United States Lighthouse Society. My name is Jeremy D'Entremont. Welcome. My co-host today is Michelle Jewel Shaw, chairperson of Friends of Portsmouth Harbor Lighthouses, a chapter of the American Lighthouse Foundation. Hi, Michelle.
Hi, Jeremy, and hello to all of our listeners out there.
Today is March 13th, 2022, and this is episode 164 of Lighthearted. In a few minutes, we're going to listen to part one of a two-part interview with Terry and Jeri Cole. Terry was the resident park ranger at Fort Point Lighthouse in Maine for more than 30 years. And then we'll have a special Be a Lighthouse segment about an art exhibition that is benefiting the people of Ukraine. First, what's happened on the state lighthouse history, Michelle?
Well, Jeremy, on March 13, 1819, a lighthouse was authorized at Craney Island, Virginia, at the mouth of the Elizabeth River in Chesapeake Bay. It was decided to place a lightship near the island instead, and the lightship placed there in 1820 was the first permanent lightship station in the country. A screw pile lighthouse replaced the lightship in 1859, and it was rebuilt in 1884. The screw pile lighthouse was removed in 1936.
On his Lighthouse Friends website, Craig Anderson quotes keeper Charles Sterling in 1918 during World War I. Sterling said there had been no coal deliveries for months, so he was collecting driftwood to heat the lighthouse. He said he was doing his bit to help with the war effort. So, Michelle, please help me tell our listeners about Fort Point Lighthouse and today's guests.
Sure, Jeremy. Fort Point Lighthouse is in Stockton Springs, Maine, near the mouth of the Penobscot River. The light station is part of Fort Point State Park and is adjacent to the remains of Fort Pownall, which was built in 1759 to guard against the French.
Fort Point Light was established in 1836, and the 31-foot square brick lighthouse that stands today was built in 1857. Because of its beautiful and accessible location, Fort Point Light was always a sought-after station for keepers.
In 1973, 22-year-old Coast Guardsman Terry Cole became the lightkeeper at Fort Point. When they moved into the lighthouse, he and his wife Jeri were raising two young daughters. While he was stationed at Fort Point with the Coast Guard, Terry became involved with Fort Point State Park, which came into being in 1974. He served as park manager for a while before he and his family moved on to a Coast Guard station at Race Point on Cape Cod in 1976.
In 1988, Fort Point Light was automated and the Coast Guard reassigned its keepers. After automation, the Coast Guard leased the light station to the state of Maine, and the keeper's house became housing for a park ranger and his family. The first person to fill the live-in position was Terry Cole, beginning in 1989. As park manager, Terry kept an eye on the lighthouse and fort and gave impromptu tours for more than 12,000 people who climbed the tower.
Public tours and maintenance of the buildings kept Terry busy for more than 3 decades. Terry's wife Jeri played a large role, helping to organize events and answering visitors' questions, often from a kitchen window of the keeper's house. Terry enjoys historic research and has documented much of the light station's history, and he has worked as the archivist in charge of the special collections at the Belfast, Maine Public Library. He also rejoined the Coast Guard as a reservist in 1998.
Terry retired this past summer after 44 years working for Maine Parks and Lands and more than 30 years of living at the Fort Point Lighthouse. I spoke with Terry and Jeri Cole in January. I've split the interview into 2 parts. We'll hear part 1 in this episode and part 2 in the episode that will be released next week on March 20th. So let's listen to part 1 now. I'm speaking today with Terry Cole, who recently retired as the longtime resident park manager at Fort Point State Park and Lighthouse in Stockton Springs, Maine, and also with Terry's wife, Jeri. Thank you so much for joining me today, Terry and Jeri. I really appreciate it.
Glad to be here.
So I've known you for probably, I was trying to figure it out, I think close to 30 years. And since I would say the early 90s is probably when I first visited you while you were living there. And I visited Fort Point Lighthouse many times over the years, as you remember, often with tour groups. I want to thank both of you very much for your hospitality over the years during those visits. It was always a pleasure, always a lot of fun visiting there. I do want to talk about your personal experiences about life at Fort Point State Park and Lighthouse, but I want to start with some of the history, Terry. And I know you've researched a lot of the history of the lighthouse and the fort there and the whole area. The Penobscot River area, of course, is really beautiful. There's a lot of interesting history. One of the events that's pretty famous there, it's not the most positive episode. I'd say maybe it's more like an infamous episode in history rather than famous, but certainly interesting. The worst naval defeat in American history happened there. Can you tell me about that?
Sure. It's considered the worst naval disaster until Pearl Harbor. Down in Castine, an area that had many different countries had possession of it, but during the Revolution, a force of British came up and took over the town and rebuilt the fort as a way to keep the Americans from down below at bay, more or less. But the people down in Massachusetts didn't really like that very much. So they sent a fairly large expedition up to remove the British, and a number of ships and about 1,000 soldiers. Paul Revere was in charge of the artillery for the Americans. And what happened was they stalled. And in fact, one of the leaders was Saltonstall from Massachusetts. They couldn't decide what to do.
Yeah.
They would make an attack and then retreat. And it just went on. And it was really a long time. It's probably a month and a half, 2 months. And then they waited too long. The British ships from away, I think from Halifax, and the Americans hightailed it. They didn't have any place to go but upriver.
Yeah.
And it was a mess. They scuttled their ships. A number of ships, carcasses are on the shores of the Penobscot. Paul Revere walked back to Massachusetts. He went all the way to Augusta and get back there. And Saltonstall was tried and found guilty of poor leadership.
Yeah.
He was given a wooden sword as a token of his court-martial.
Wasn't Paul Revere court-martialed also, I believe?
I think so. I think he managed to get
off. Yeah, I believe so. Well, it's a very interesting story. So you mentioned Fort Pownall. That's the reason why it's called Fort Point, the state park and where the lighthouse is. Fort Pownall. When was Fort Pownall established?
1759. The French and Indian War was going on, and they wanted to block the mouth of the river, and they chose this spot, beautiful spot to have a fort. Yeah. And a lighthouse, and never really saw any action, but it was a center for trade. It was finally destroyed by the Americans early on in the Revolution. Up until then, it was a center of the whole area. Waldo County really started right there.
So why was a lighthouse established at Fort Point in 1836?
Location. It was the perfect spot. You know, it's on a headland, and the river starts right there. A number of other lighthouses had been established coming from seaward as routes to Bangor, because Bangor was up and coming. It was the lumber capital of the world, probably. By 1830, over 1,000 vessels were recorded going up the river, and so they needed a lighthouse.
And wasn't Stockton Springs a center for shipping also? I think potatoes were an export from there. Am I right about that?
Yeah. Yes, it was another up and coming. It's going to be a city, and they had the largest wooden docks in the world at the time, around the 1900s, 20th century.
So that was quite a bit after the lighthouse was established.
Yes.
But it was mainly the fact that the Penobscot River was so busy with shipping related to the lumber business in Bangor, right?
Exactly.
The light was established, yeah. And one of the interesting things about Fort Point Light Station is that it still has one of the few 19th century pyramidal, I used to say pyramidal, but I believe the correct pronunciation is pyramidal fog bell towers still standing.
Well, because it's nice to have a light to go by, but unfortunately there's a lot of fog there. So a sound device was important. In 1890 it was built, and a large Stevens apparatus was there to ring the bell.
The Stevens mechanism there in the fog bell tower, that had to be hand wound by the keeper every so many hours. Is that right?
Yes. Yeah. Every 4 hours it ran out.
Like a grandfather clock, you said.
Yeah, very similar to that kind of idea. Yeah, I know there's very few of those remaining. They rebuilt one at Goat Island Light in Kennebunkport, Maine.
Yeah. The construction of this is amazing. There's no real rot. There's a little bit just starting out, but it's up off the ground, and they just knew what they were doing.
No, it's a beautiful little building. I love it. I would like to talk about some of the human history there. It seems like it was probably kind of a plum assignment for a lighthouse keeper, compared to some of the offshore lights in the region. Pretty nice place to live for the most part. So Fort Point had only 4 resident keepers from the 1880s to the 1950s by my count, which is pretty good. So obviously they tended to have long stints there. Do you think it was you lived there for a long time, so you know as well as anybody whether it's a good place to live or not. Do you think that's the main reason why there are so few keepers there over the years?
Well, most of those keepers were at the end of their career. Most of them had been a number of lighthouses, offshore lights. And so this was I would think it was a nice change to have the access. They had the steamers came regularly, and they could go uptown. So the access and not having to row ashore and hope you don't get tipped over and stuff. So.
Yeah. And I know you've researched some of the specific keepers and families who lived there. One of the longtime keepers was Arthur Mitchell. He was there 1929 to 52. Was he the longest serving keeper at Fort Point?
Yes. Yeah.
You interviewed his grandson, is that right?
Yes. One story his grandson told me was that Captain Mitchell didn't want to retire. He had to retire. But at some point, his hometown, where his records were, the town office burned. Whatever they had to redo it and stuff. And it turned out that it was the date of his birthday went back a year. So he actually cheated. You said he cheated the government out of the year. He got to stay longer by a year because of that. So, yeah, Arthur Curtis, his grandson, spent all the summers there as a child. His grandfather sometimes called him that kid. And I'm not sure if he was, mentioned he called him a pest sometimes. His grandfather did, but I guess one time Arthur had kept his grandfather's pocket watch. He thought he dropped it in there was outhouse there. So we're not sure if it's there now, but it was incredible when we interviewed him. We walked around and we went into the bell tower, and he really just memory started really come back. The smell of it, he really
sense memory,
really brought out and he had all kinds of stories and stuff.
So he would wind that mechanism himself as a kid, right?
Yeah. And it wasn't apparently he said it wasn't easy.
And Terry, I understand you have a poem that was written by keeper Arthur Mitchell. Is that right?
I do.
Want to read that?
Yes. It's by Mrs. Zella W. Preston, and she was from Cherryfield, and that's where Arthur and his wife were from.
Okay, so this is a poem about Keeper Mitchell, not written by him, but by this woman about him. Yeah.
No. It's called Sending Its Beams Far Down the Bay, stands Fort Point Light, firm on the shore, where broad Penobscot wends its way to swell Atlantic's watery shore. The captain climbs the winding stair when darkening twilight ends the day, and lights the beacon waiting there to guide the ships upon the way. His good wife in the room below puts on the kettle for the tea. The house dog wanders to and fro. The fog comes drifting in from sea. If dark or moonlit be the night, though rain and fog, though snow and hail, the captain keeps the beacon bright. It guides his sailors without fail. Though loud and louder howls the storm, beside their hearth the fires burn bright. Lighthouse, they sit together, snug and warm, though cold and colder grows the night. God bless the captain and his wife, the keepers of the Fort Point Light. May long and happy be their life, and may peace attend their day and night.
Very nice. Something occurred to me. You mentioned the dog in the poem. There were a number of well-known dogs at lighthouses on the Maine coast. Some of them I like to call fog dogs that learned to pull the rope and sound the fog bell. Was there ever anything like that at Fort Point that you know of?
Yeah. Well, it's amazing how many lighthouses had dogs, and they were I think most of them could ring the bell with a rope on it. And Cody was the lighthouse dog at Fort Point. And when a ship went by, Cody would run out to the bell tower and grab the rope in his mouth and ring it. And the ship would answer him back. And he had quite a reputation. Oh, this was in the 1950s. It was
Okay.
Ernest Matthew was the keeper.
Okay. Yeah, I thought maybe there was one of those dogs there. So glad to hear it. Every Maine lighthouse with a fog bell should have a fog dog. So I understand you also found some interesting things about keeper John Thurston. Was there 1902 to 1919? Is that right?
Yes. I had gotten all the logbook copies from the archives and spent quite a bit of time going through them. And I came to this one page that was very different. It was, as you looked at it, you could tell that a child had been writing the alphabet, writing her name. She drew a nice picture of a 1890s woman in an 1890s dress. She said, Beatrice writing. And so for a long time, we were trying to figure out who was Beatrice. Was she a relative, one of the keepers? And I had the bell tower open and it had some displays in there. And especially on the weekends, I'd have it open to the public. And one Sunday, I remember going out and just talking with people and got to talking with a woman and mentioning that there was this Beatrice, and I couldn't figure out who she was. And the woman said, "Oh, you mean Beatrice Sperling? Mm-hmm. She lives in Castine." And so we found out about Beatrice. She was Thurston's granddaughter. He had two granddaughters and a grandson and one daughter. She was married to Sperling, and he was a keeper. So his daughter was a lighthouse keeper's wife too, and they were out at Franklin Island, and then came to Dice Head. We found out they would go back and forth by boat to visit each other. But Beatrice, we called her and went to visit her, and she had a lot of memories about Fort Point. She remembered skating there's a fort foundation. This where the main fort was, and when it floods and it freezes over. And she remembers skating there as a child. There's a picture of the lighthouse back in around 1910, and at one point I had a magnifying glass and I was looking around at the pictures, and I all of a sudden noticed that in the picture the garage door was open and there were two children and a woman in white dresses, and they had to have been Beatrice and her sister and mother. She played piano in silent movies when she was a teenager.
Oh, neat.
Yeah.
Wow. Huh. Cool.
Yeah.
So you mentioned the Dice Head Light Station and Castine. By boat, they're fairly close to each other, right? So I imagine the families at those two places socialize quite a bit with each other.
Yes. Yeah. One picture of the pier shows a boat, and it has to be Thurston's boat. And it's close, but sometimes can be pretty rough.
Before we move on to other subjects, anything else about keepers and families at Fort Point that kind of stands out for you? Yeah,
well, one little story is the first keeper his name was William Cluley. His father had been a soldier at the fort, and William had taken up as a mariner, and he was a captain of a ship and had his own ship, and there was land ownership right there at the lighthouse before it became a lighthouse. He owned part of that property, and when the government took it over, his house had to go, so they made him the first keeper. At that time, it wasn't the same. It was a granite house residence and a granite tower, round conical shaped tower. And there were a number of keepers complained about how much it leaked, how badly it heated. And so it was rebuilt only 20, 30 years later. So anyway, William Cluley, WC, that's his initials. Delbert Webster was there 1872 to 1902. He was one time out plowing the garden, and he came across this spoon, and he dusted it off, and there was initials WC. It had to have been William Cluley. So it stayed in the family. The Websters kept being passed on, and not too long ago, I think it was 2013, I think a relative got in touch with me and wanted to donate it to the park. So the spoon with the initials WC are back at the park now.
Well, that's neat.
Yeah.
That's great. So let's go forward in time as far as the history goes, but back in time for you. Let's talk about the time you spent as a Coast Guard lightkeeper at Fort Point. You were assigned there when you were in the Coast Guard in 1973, right? You were, I think, 22 years old at the time.
Yes.
Do I have that right? Okay.
Yes.
How long had you been in the Coast Guard at that point? And how did you get assigned to Fort Point? Was it something you wanted, or how did that happen?
Well, I was in, I came in 69. I was down in Woods Hole on a buoy tender and mutualed up to Rockland Station. And at that time, there were a lot more manned lighthouses around and in Penobscot Bay. And so they were occasionally asking for somebody to volunteer to be a relief keeper. Jeri and I both said, hey, it's something different. Let's try it, We did Brown's Head. We went up to Brown's Head.
Oh,
It was the Baxters where he was the.
yeah, I know John Baxter.
I think she had a baby there. I'm not.
Yes, they did. I did an article about that, actually. There's John Baxter and his wife had their son, I think Stephen was born there.
Yeah.
I think it was the last Coast Guard baby born there at that station on Vinyl Haven, for people listening on Vinyl Haven Island. Yeah.
Yeah, they were awful nice people. They left and we were there for the weekend. And when they came back, the ferry wasn't running anymore because it was too rough out. So we stayed one more night with them and get the ferry the next day. And then we spent a week out at Curtis Island relief keeping.
Oh.
So we got a reputation, and I guess it was pretty good. And so a couple other lighthouses came up were open for somebody, and Burnt Coat was the first one, and I put in for it, and somebody else got it instead of me. But then Fort Point came up, and it's funny that the first time I ever saw Fort Point was at night. We were on our boat, sort of doing patrols and stuff, and I had been sleeping down below, and I came up and asked the guy that running the boat. There was a bright light over towards the east, and I said, "What is that light?" And he said, "Oh, that's Fort Point." That's the first I was introduced to Fort Point. So I put in for it. The aids navigation officer knew us, and we got the job, and it came in January of '73. Stayed there 3 years.
Remind me, where are you from originally?
We're from Massachusetts. I'm from Middleborough, and Jeri's from Bridgewater. They're both beside each other.
Yeah, I know where they are. I know if our listeners necessarily know, but yeah, not that far from the Boston area.
I was actually born in Hope, Maine.
Oh, okay.
And didn't live there long, but I grew up in Middleborough and then in Bridgewater. And then when we got married and had the chance to move, to do Terry called it a mutual, which is if you're looking for a place to go, you can look at a bulletin board and see who else is looking for some place to switch out of. So he found Rockland Station, and it sounded good to us. And I'd always wanted to come back to Maine, just the right timing. Yeah. But and then.
And the station was unique. It had a full-fledged museum there that Captain Black established, and being there was quite an experience, a learning experience about just running something in the history of the area and stuff.
Sure. Yeah, the late Ken Black, who that collection, of course, used to be at the Shore Village Museum in Rockland there, and became the basis of the Maine Lighthouse Museum in Rockland now, known as Mr. Lighthouse in the area, of course. Yeah. So when you were at Fort Point, you were the only keeper, right? There weren't multiple keepers, Coast Guard keepers there, right?
Right. It was a single officer in charge.
The two of you were raising two young daughters when you were there in the 70s, right? At Fort Point in the 70s when Terry was in the Coast Guard. I understand there was something that happened with your daughter, Melissa, soon after you arrived. I've heard this story. It had you both a little worried, I think, briefly. Is that right?
I mean, overall, our time there coming to a lighthouse together, I mean, it was great because it was just, we were just together all the time, and that we loved that. and our girls were little. Melissa has always been an independent girl. And we were out playing in the yard with Melissa and her baby sister Amanda and our dog. And quite often we would play outside, and then we would walk down to the beach and collect sea glass and then come back. And we were out there that day, and we turned around and Melissa was nowhere in sight. And of course, panic sets in, she's a little tiny girl, and we immediately knew where she was headed. So as we called her and ran down to the path, she must have heard us and was trudging back up. And she said she'd gone down to the beach. She was going to the beach to get glass.
Uh-huh.
So it was a scary moment, but
yeah. Well, I know that trail well. I've walked down to that beach a number of times and I've been there. It's a real pretty little walk there. So it must have been interesting raising small girls there at that time. You were there. Let me just get that straight. You were there for how long during that first stretch when you were in the Coast Guard?
3 years.
3 years. Okay.
Yeah.
And your girls were quite small at that time, right?
Yeah. Melissa was 3 and Amanda was just a baby, just a year.
Uh-huh.
Yeah. Big changes in a child's life in 3 years. Melissa went from being, a toddler to going to school.
Uh-huh.
And she started school in Stockton.
So she must remember a good fair amount about those days.
She does.
Yeah.
She does.
Unique early childhood there. Did you have any unusual visitors during that stretch when you're in the Coast Guard? Anything out of the ordinary?
There were always unusual visitors. It was, more the case that, there were a lot of people wanting information, and it was really at the beginnings of the state park.
Uh-huh.
So that the amount of visitors weren't,
No,
it wasn't the same amount that there is now. So it was a more friendly and cordial interaction, a relaxed interaction that we would have with people, because we weren't pressured to be having, the hordes of people that would come later on. But yeah, so some of the unusual visitors we had.
Well, I'll never forget. It was a very, very foggy night. Fog soup, and we had company over. I think.
Mhm.
I think we met a number of people in the town and get to know a lot of different things. Anyway, we were, we had supper, and all of a sudden there was a knock at the door, and we opened the door not knowing who it was, and this woman was there, and she was talking a little bit with us. We could tell that she'd been probably having some beverages,
Uh-huh.
but she really wanted to know what note the foghorn was in. And that was I said, I'm sorry, I don't know. That was a good one.
Yeah.
Years later, we saw her several times and talked about it and stuff.
Did you ever figure out what note the
No.
foghorn was?
No, it's something we probably should have figured out.
And Terry, you told me a story once about a Coast Guard inspection team, interesting thing that happened during a visit. So either of you could tell that story maybe.
Okay, well, when we would have inspections, just the idea of having someone come into your house to inspect basically everything.
Mhm.
And, there was some stress involved in that. And we were pretty meticulous about how things were kept and what we did. And when people would come to your home, always you would welcome them. And in my point of view, you welcome people with food. And I always made sure that when he was going to have an inspection, that I had made pie and had a fresh pot of coffee on, anything we could do to make our guests welcome in the house.
Mhm.
And so it became a little bit of a thing that anytime there was an inspection, people knew that they were going to be treated well at our house. And the pie became a little bit of a joke, something that people would look forward to. And then there was this one inspection.
It was a full-fledged inspection. It was officers from Boston, the district office. So this was a big one. And yeah, I think we had a full captain was in charge of it, and several warrant officers, and quite a six or seven people. And first thing that they said, I think the captain said, "I hear you have pie." And but I think you made sure you did.
I made sure. I made several pies because we knew that we were going to be getting a crowd.
Yeah.
And I made sure to have the pie coming out of the oven just as they got there.
What kind of pie did you make?
Apple, of course. Yeah.
So what happened?
Okay. So the Coast Guard was very concerned about fires. And so we had fire extinguishers in every room, big ones, the real big ones. And another thing we had besides those was we had a fire hose upstairs. It was coiled, it was rolled up on a holder, and it was, it had a faucet and you could turn it on. And I had made a little box to kind of make it look a little nicer and stuff. And it was kind of a tight fit. But we went up and I took the box off and showed them that and put it back on. And a little while later, I was in the office with one of the yeomen, and all of a sudden,
I called to him to come down quickly.
And I came flying in through the living room and into the dining room, and here's I think it was the captain was standing on our dining room table with a big bowl, and water was coming down through the chandelier light, and the warrant officer was over by the light switch, and he said, "Captain, you want me to turn the light on?" It just, to see that, not that many people enlisted would see that type of thing, but it's forever going to be a memory. It'll crack me up.
So what happened? The water from that hose must have turned on a tiny bit and then was coming right through the light fixture.
You can still see the water stains today.
Yeah.
You painted over it, but.
Jeri, you mentioned before that while you were there during that stretch, it was kind of the beginnings of the state park there. And Terry, if I understand right, you actually started working for Maine Parks and Land while you were still stationed there in the Coast Guard. Do I have that right?
Yeah. The fort was right next door. I mean, it was 100 feet from the lighthouse, the remains of it. And it was a custom that every keeper there would go and take care of it, mow it, and keep it up. And it was just a part-time job. People drove up, and there's a parking lot right there. And that was my first year there. And then they built the park, and it became a full-fledged manager's position. And so I became a manager for a couple of years until I was transferred. When I got out, it wasn't too long. I get out of it. I was at Race Point, and we decided to come back to Maine.
Right.
And just by chance, my parks boss stopped by one time. We were at a flea market, and he came over and said, "Do you want your old job back?" I was unemployed, and I said, "Sure, why not?" It was just a seasonal job, but we got back into the park service, and the rest is history.
Right. So for that stretch until 1989, right, you were not living in the park or at the lighthouse. You were commuting from your home.
Yeah.
Right. But I actually, first time I visited Fort Point Lighthouse was 1989. Larry Baum was a Coast Guard lightkeeper, and he ended up he was the last one. It was actually the automation process was underway when I visited there. I interviewed him with my VHS camcorder at that time, and the foghorn started going off. And I have this on videotape. He stopped talking in the middle of what he was saying, and he said something like, automation, and he got up and walks off camera to turn the horn off. But I don't know if I'll leave that in or not. But anyway. Then you became the resident park manager at Fort Point. You moved back into the keeper's house in 1989, right? How did it feel to live there again, to move back in?
It was just surreal. I had actually dreamt about it a lot. We were feeling that it was going to happen, the paperwork and the government part of it. And we actually went down and signed the contract the day I was working at school, and we went right down, signed the contract, and we went to our home, and we packed up all that we could. I can't remember, we had a mattress.
Yeah, we had a couple of mattresses and got our girls and the mattresses, and we been a rough night
Yeah, it was
in the lighthouse.
It was rustic, but
Yeah.
we were so glad. It was just incredible. Once again, that smell. I always think of that when coming into the house. It hit me right. We were kind of home for years. I would always, if I was outside and maybe it was foggy, and I'd kind of look up at the light and think, I can't believe I'm here. It took a long time for that to go away. It was unbelievable.
You can go online to maine.gov for more information on Fort Point State Park. The park is open to the public from mid-May to mid-October from 9 a.m. to sunset every day. In addition to the lighthouse and the remains of Fort Pownall, there are picnic tables, walking trails, and a pier on the Penobscot River.
I really enjoyed having the chance to talk with Terry and Jeri Cole about the years at Fort Point. As I said earlier, we're going to hear part 2 of the interview in the next episode of this podcast, which will be released on Sunday, March 20th. Next, we're going to have a special segment that falls under the Be a Lighthouse heading. An organization called Lighthouse Immersive is sponsoring a fundraising initiative in support of the National Bank of Ukraine Fund and Red Cross Fund to help aid the people of Ukraine. The show, Immersive Shevchenko, Soul of Ukraine, was created by Ukrainian studio Rock and Light and First Theatrical Charitable Foundation, a creative team that continues to work all across Ukraine despite the dangers of the Russian invasion. Taras Shevchenko, who lived from 1814 to 1861, was a Ukrainian poet, writer, artist, public and political figure, and folklorist. His literary heritage is regarded to be the foundation of modern Ukrainian literature, and he's also known for many masterpieces as a painter and illustrator. In 1847, Shevchenko was politically convicted for explicitly promoting the independence of Ukraine, writing poems in the Ukrainian language, and ridiculing members of the Russian imperial house. In this new show, the audience can see pieces by Shevchenko projected across the gallery walls, and the show is set to a soundtrack to further immerse you in his world. The exhibit first opened in Odessa to celebrate the 30th anniversary of Ukrainian independence last year. Immersive Shevchenko will be shown in 6 cities on March 15th. That's this Tuesday, March 15th. Boston, Chicago, Denver, Los Angeles, Toronto, and San Francisco. There will also be a virtual showing on March 15th. Details are available at lighthouseimmersive.com. One of the show's producers, Valeriy Kostyuk, was born and raised in Ukraine and lives in Toronto, Canada. I had the chance to speak with them last week. Let's listen to that now. I'm speaking with Valeriy Kostyuk. It was actually in Toronto, but is originally from Ukraine. Thank you so much for joining me today, Valeriy.
Thank you for the invitation.
You are one of the producers of this new art show or exhibit, the Shevchenko Soul of Ukraine. Again, you're originally from Ukraine. You're from Odessa. Is that right?
Yep, Odessa, Ukraine. Wonderful city on the Black Sea with a nice lighthouse, as we just discussed.
Yeah. I've been, like a lot of people in our country, I knew a bit about Ukraine, but I'm learning a lot more about the geography in recent weeks unfortunately, not for the best reasons, but you do have some beautiful lighthouses. Do you still have family and friends in Ukraine?
Yep, I have majority of my family is currently in Ukraine in various cities, Odessa, Vinnytsia, Khmelnytsky, Kyiv. So it ranges in the center of Ukraine. Everyone right now is either is at home or is in the process of evacuating, or enrolled in territorial defense units, or making tank masking nets, or are serving in the Ukrainian armed forces in order to protect the country from the Russian aggression. So it's everyone's in different places, everyone's in different sort of state of mind, and of course, what is happening is not an ideal scenario that we've all been expecting, but unfortunately it is what it is right now.
Yes, it's a very changed world from what it was just a couple of weeks ago for so many. I imagine you're in constant contact with a lot of people over there. So you live in Toronto and you're a theater producer. Is that how you would define yourself?
For the most part, after COVID, I've become producer of experiences as well. So we've been working on Immersive and Go. We've been working on Magic Immersive, which is an immersive magic show. And on the side, as an independent project, I've produced Immersive Shevchenko's Soul of Ukraine in Odessa as part of the 30th anniversary of independence celebration, which premiered in August.
The name Lighthouse Immersive that these shows you're talking about, they fall under that banner. Were you the one who chose that name, Lighthouse Immersive?
No, it was our producers. It was producer Svetlana Dvoretsskaya, who's also a business partner of Corey Ross, and they've both been working together in order to come up with a creative name for our company. And our exhibits mostly focus on projectors, so it's projector art. It's multimedia and a lot of work with light. And coming out of knowing that, as well as having a very talented team that is helping us make all these successful projects, Lighthouse was sort of a logical name for a company like this, because it shines the way, it shows people where to go, and so are we. Creating these new innovative projects are leading the way in the art sector, almost like a lighthouse, and attracting people or different ships to us in order to experience something new, experience new emotions, see something that has never been seen before. So the title Lighthouse Immersive was very fitting.
Well, it makes a lot of sense to me. Thank you for explaining that. Makes complete sense. So tell me about Taras Shevchenko, the subject of the immersive exhibit we're talking about. Why is he regarded as so important in Ukrainian culture?
I call him a spiritual leader of the Ukrainian nation. He was born in 1800s, a serf, and for the most of his life, he was either a serf or he was imprisoned. Imprisoned due to his ideas of Ukraine and Ukrainian culture and Ukrainian values. He was born in Ukraine, but when he was bought out of serfdom while being an art student, deciding to be a portrait painter, he ended up being bought out by his colleagues out of serfdom and became a free man. And when he became a free man, that's when he started advancing the ideas of Ukrainian nation, sort of writing poetry that has truly explained the Ukrainian soul. And for these exact reasons, he was exiled into Kazakhstan, where he spent 14 years of his life. And very soon after being freed, he ended up dying, a 47-year-old, very tired man. Because of just the tragedies that he had to live through. He was full of energy. He was full of ideas. He wanted to paint. He wanted to create art that could help his people, which is something he continued doing while being in exile, and something he was doing while being a serf. And for many Ukrainians, his death in those times was a big tragedy. He died in St. Petersburg, and he was brought down all the way to Kaniv. As per his testament, which is a very famous poem of his, he was buried on a hill near Dnipro River, where there's a beautiful view. And right now that town is also a symbol of Ukrainian resilience and sort of this energetic town where a lot of Ukrainians come to sort of absorb this energy. So after his death, his portraits were equivalent to a portrait of an Orthodox icon of God's or Christ. So his portraits were hanging in the opposite corners from these icons in Ukrainian households at that time. So he was truly a revolutionary figure for many Ukrainians, and very much today it reflects the Ukrainian struggle for its independence, its unity, and its culture, most importantly.
Well, it seems like this exhibit couldn't be more timely right now. I'm sure his work and spirit means so much to people. Can you describe the exhibit itself? Explain what this immersive concept is? What do people experience when they go to see this?
So the immersive concept is a combination of multimedia technologies. So it's both audio and it's also visual. So we've taken analyzed 800 paintings of Taras Shevchenko from the National Museum collections in Kyiv, and we've selected only 200 in order to combine them into the storytelling, which we use in order to explain, in order to share the emotions that Shevchenko has felt during his life. There's emotions of love, there's emotion of terror, there's emotions of resilience, there's emotions of hate, there's emotions of almost every single emotion on the spectrum of emotions that Taras Shevchenko has demonstrated throughout his lifetime. So you'll be able to relive his life. You will be able to not only see but hear what he has heard. Our creative director and Taisia Poda and our composer Timur Polyansky, they have been working together in order to create this tandem of both audio and visuals in order to create this natural flow of art pieces and music. Timur, for example, also analyzed the music that Shevchenko was listening to, the plays that he has seen in theaters, as well as friends that he had. One of Shevchenko's friends was a very famous Ukrainian composer, Bulak Artemovsky, who wrote a very famous Ukrainian opera, Zaporozhye za Dunaiem. And based on this and these assets, we managed to create this exhibit that truly shows the soul of Shevchenko and Ukrainians as well.
And it premiered in Odessa, is that right?
That is correct. It premiered in Odessa in 2021 in August. For myself and my co-producer, Natalia Delieva, on this project, we thought that it would be very important for us not to start this tour with the capital, for example. We wanted to start it with a smaller Ukrainian town, which is Odessa, not only because it's my hometown, but also because it's the sea capital of Ukraine, and it's also has this atmosphere that allows people that creates an appropriate atmosphere for creativity. Mm-hmm. So we decided to do it in Odessa, and it ran there for a month. After that, it has been presented at the National Pavilion, Ukrainian National Pavilion at Dubai Expo in 2020 in United Arab Emirates. And in October, it opened in Kyiv, Ukraine, at the newly built cultural center called Shevchenko Hub, which was also opened by President Zelensky himself.
President Zelensky actually saw the exhibit, right?
Yes, yeah. Did. Him and the First Lady have seen the entire thing. We had a lovely chat, lovely conversation about Shevchenko. First Lady Olena Zelenska has mentioned that she would love to spend more time with us, but unfortunately protocol didn't allow them to do that.
We're speaking, what's today, March 7th, but people will be hearing this, I think, on this will be posted on the 13th, this episode of the podcast. And the actual exhibit is being shown in a bunch of places all on the same day on the 15th, right? In 6 different cities, as I understand it. Is that right?
We're looking at Toronto, San Francisco, Los Angeles, Denver, Boston, and Chicago. So it's going to be in 6 cities happening on March 15th, all day long. All of the proceeds from ticket sales are going to be going directly to Ukraine to help its humanitarian causes. We're working both with the Red Cross as well as the National Bank of Ukraine, which are serving 2 different aspects of humanitarian needs of the Ukrainian people right now.
There's also, I believe, an online version that'll be happening that same day. Is that correct?
Yes, it will be. There's going to be an online tour that we will be doing that will be presented to the audiences. It's going to be hosted by a very renowned Canadian playwright, journalist, and a former Toronto Star theater critic, Richard Ozunian, who's working closely with National Museum of Taras Shevchenko in Kyiv, with Yulia Shelenko and Dmitro Stus as well as the museum here in Toronto with Lyudmila Pogorelova, in order to create the informative aspect of it. In these times, doing tours like this is something that, especially virtual tours online, allow us to sort of unite the world. Because right now in Kiev, there's the situation is that all of the artwork, the original artwork of Taras Shevchenko, is being packed in crates in order for safekeeping, into the same crates in which in 1941, the same artworks were evacuated out of Kiev during Nazi advances into Kiev and its occupation. So it's almost as if a cycle has closed and the history is repeating itself. Now the works are being protected from an enemy and an occupational force that is coming from the opposite side, which is from the Russian Federation. So it's a quite significant effort in order to create this online component for anyone in North America to see.
Everybody who's observing what's happening in Ukraine right now, is the primary thing is we're all sad and angry and all kinds of emotions, mostly related to the people. But obviously the arts, the history of Ukraine is all under assault, as well as the people themselves.
In times like this, you're thinking back to World War II, and when Churchill has said when the budget, the budget of United Kingdom was going to be, chopped up, and the cultural sort of and the national heritage expenses would have been cut down. Churchill has said that, if we don't have a culture, then what are we fighting for? And this is exactly what's happening right now. Ukrainian people have never been this united ever in the history of Ukraine. And the fact that we're uniting around protecting the Ukrainian culture, as well as popularizing Ukrainian culture through events like this, it truly makes it all worthwhile. And everyone who's going to either come in person to see the exhibit or is going to view it online will be able to understand why all of this is worthwhile for Ukraine. Mm-hmm. Exactly why, we also need help in this battle. We have a rich history that we adore, history that we value, culture that we value. And for many of us, letting go of this culture is not an option. And the struggle will continue.
Yeah.
Hopefully, all of this will come to a conclusion that is going to allow arts and culture prevail.
Let's certainly hope so. I think all of us were watching this situation through TV and the internet and newspapers and et cetera, recognize a lot of things you just said. We're seeing incredible strength out of Ukraine and unity, and it's inspiring to all of us. I have one final question for you, and to some extent you may have already answered it, but if you could tell our listeners one thing about Ukraine, what would it be?
It's a very warm and welcoming country where anyone who visits it is going to feel like you're returning home. So I really hope that after all of this is over, all Americans, Canadians, anyone across this globe will be able to visit Ukraine and experience exactly this.
Just one more thing before we end this. I just want to mention people can get tickets for the Immersive Shevchenko show online, of course. What's the website for this?
lighthouseimmersive.com.
lighthouseimmersive.com. And I understand that depending on the city, if they buy tickets for this, they see another show as well. I know it's virtual Frida Kahlo, I believe, in Boston, but is the Van Gogh one in some of the cities as well?
Depending on which city you're in, there's going to be either Frida Kahlo or Immersive Van Gogh.
Thank you so much, Valeriy. I really appreciate your time, and I wish you all the best with this Immersive Shevchenko and everything else you're involved with. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Jeri.
Thanks again to Valeriy Kostyuk for today's interview, and of course also Terry and Jeri Cole. Next Sunday, March 20th, we'll be hearing part 2 of the interview with Terry and Jeri Cole.
The author, Mae Davidson, wrote in her book, Whatever It Takes, I quote, "My attachment to the state of Maine is that of a barnacle to a ledge, the pull of the moon to the earth. Maine, because of its singular and profound beauty, is a place of worship without walls. I love it so." End quote.
Thank you to all the volunteers, members, and staff of the U.S. Lighthouse Society. Go online to uslhs.org to learn more about everything the Society offers. If you listen through Apple Podcasts, please rate and review us. Please share word of Lighthearted on social media. To all our faithful listeners and to our new ones, thanks for listening and
Keep a good light.
Shine, let it shine.